I am Joshua, 28 years old, and my father stood up in front of 500 wedding guests and publicly cut me out of the family. Before I tell you about the absolute destruction of his fake empire that followed, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I was standing at the very back of a massive, heavily decorated country club ballroom. Let me paint the picture for you. This was the kind of venue with vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers that cost more than my entire yearly salary, and enormous floral arrangements that smelled like old money. It was my brother Christopher's wedding. He was 32, a top-tier cancer doctor, the golden child of the family, and the undeniable man of the hour. Everyone in that room was dressed to the nines. The champagne was flowing like water. A live string quartet was playing softly in the corner, and the air was thick with polite laughter and the scent of expensive roasted duck. I was tucked away near the kitchen doors. I wasn't a groomsman. I wasn't even seated at a family table. I was placed at table 42, right next to the restrooms, seated with distant cousins who barely remembered my name. But I was there. I showed up because, foolishly, some microscopic part of me still thought I had to play the role of the supportive younger brother. Then, my father, Matthew, tapped his silver fork against his crystal champagne flute. The gentle clinking sound cut through the low hum of conversation. The entire room went dead silent. He stood up, smoothing his tailored tuxedo jacket. He smiled warmly at Christopher and his new bride, Sarah. They were sitting at the grand head table, looking like they belonged on the cover of a bridal magazine. Sarah looked beautiful, completely naive to the snake pit she had just married into. "I want to make a toast," my father said, his voice echoing perfectly through the high-end microphone system. He looked at Christopher with a deep, shining pride that I had never, not once in my entire 28 years of life, seen directed at me. "I only have one son, our groom today, an elite doctor, a wonderful man, and the bright future of our legacy." I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down the center of my back, but I didn't move a muscle. I knew a jab was coming. I just didn't realize he was bringing a butcher knife to a wedding. My father's eyes scanned the massive room. He looked past the hundreds of wealthy friends, hospital board members, and business partners, until his gaze locked directly onto me, standing near the exit doors. His warm, fatherly smile dropped instantly. His face turned to stone. He lifted his glass and pointed it right at me. "That thing back there?" he said, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Just a mistake. A disgrace to this family." A collective, audible gasp swept through the ballroom. People shifted violently in their seats. Some turned completely around in their chairs to stare at me, their eyes wide with shock. Others stared intensely at their expensive plates, too uncomfortable to look. My brother Christopher didn't look shocked at all. He just sat there, swirling his champagne, a tiny, satisfied smirk playing on the corner of his lips. He loved this. He fed on it. Then my mother, Eleanor, leaned over into the microphone. She was wearing a silver silk dress that shimmered under the stage lights. Without missing a single beat, she let out a dry, venomous laugh that sent chills down my arms. "We should have put him up for adoption when we had the chance." The whispers started immediately. They buzzed through the room like a swarm of angry bees. People were judging, analyzing, tearing me apart with their eyes. For 28 years, I had been the family punching bag behind closed doors. Now they had brought the execution out into the public square. I didn't cry. My jaw tightened, my teeth grinding together, but I didn't let my face crack. I knew if I showed a single ounce of pain, if a single tear fell, they would win. Instead, I looked straight into my father's eyes across that massive room. I smiled. A cold, empty, terrifying smile. Then I turned around, pushed the heavy oak doors open, and walked out into the night. The freezing night air hit me like a physical punch to the chest. I walked across the massive, brightly lit asphalt parking lot, my cheap dress shoes echoing in the quiet night. The faint, muffled sound of a jazz band starting up inside the ballroom drifted out through the walls, mocking me. The party was continuing. They had excised the tumor, and now they were dancing. I reached my beat-up 10-year-old sedan. It looked like a joke parked next to the rows of Porsches, Ferraris, and heavy luxury SUVs. I unlocked it, slid into the cold driver's seat, and slammed the door shut. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white. My chest was heaving up and down. I sat there in the dark for a long time, just listening to the sound of my own ragged breathing. I didn't put the key in the ignition right away. I just let the absolute weight of the humiliation wash over me, feeling the burn of it pumping through my veins. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought walking out of that room meant I was running away to hide in shame for the rest of my life. They were so incredibly wrong. I reached over to the passenger seat, popped open the small, squeaky compartment in my dashboard, and reached far into the back. My fingers brushed against a small, black USB drive. I pulled it out. It sat in the palm of my hand, weightless, yet heavier than anything I had ever carried. This little piece of plastic held the entire rotten truth about my family. I had spent years quietly digging, observing, transferring files, and collecting receipts. I had been waiting for the right moment. I just didn't realize my father was going to build the stage, hand me the microphone, and point the spotlight directly at himself. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the starting gun. I put the keys in the ignition, the old engine sputtering to life, and drove away from the country club, leaving the noise, the fake smiles, and the flashing lights in my rearview mirror. About 10 miles down the dark highway, the adrenaline finally started to wear off, replaced by a hollow, sickening ache in my stomach. I pulled my car over onto the rough gravel shoulder. Huge semi-trucks roared past, violently shaking my small car every few minutes. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but the empty road ahead. I left the engine running for heat, reached back into my glove box, and pulled out a small, worn, yellowed envelope. Inside were 3 photographs. I kept them not out of love, not out of some desperate clinging to family memories, but as evidence. Evidence that I wasn't crazy. Evidence that the abuse was real. I flicked on the dim dome light above my head and looked at the first picture. It was me, 13 years old. I was standing on a dusty, scuffed stage in my middle school auditorium, gripping a wired microphone. I was wearing a cheap, slightly oversized blue button-down shirt that I had ironed myself that morning, burning my wrist in the process. I was singing in the annual school talent show. In the photo, I was smiling, hitting a high note, but if you looked closely at my eyes, they were locked dead onto the empty folding chairs in the 3rd row. I had waited all night for them to show up. I had given my mother the flyer a month in advance. I had reminded my father that morning. Every single time the heavy auditorium doors creaked open in the back, my heart jumped into my throat. I kept thinking, there they are. They're just running late. They care. But they never came. I found out later they had chosen to attend Christopher's high school academic promotion party instead. They didn't just skip my show. They had actually drained the small college fund my grandparents had set up for me just to pay for the outrageously expensive catering for Christopher's party. When the talent show ended, the auditorium emptied out quickly. Kids ran up the aisles, hugging their parents, holding cheap plastic participation trophies, taking flashing photos. I stood alone behind the heavy velvet curtain for 45 minutes. Finally, the school janitor, an older guy named Earl with a kind face, walked up holding a push broom. He looked at me, looked at the empty seats, and asked softly if I needed him to call someone for a ride. I lied. I told him my dad was waiting out front. I walked 3 miles home in the freezing dark that night. When I finally dragged myself up the driveway, the house was completely dark. They were still out at a fancy restaurant, celebrating Christopher's genius. I walked inside, went straight into the downstairs bathroom, locked the door, sat on the freezing cold tile floor, and cried so hard I threw up in the toilet. I remember standing up, gripping the edges of the sink, looking in the mirror at my red, swollen, pathetic face and telling myself, if I were just a little smarter, a little better, if I didn't cause so much trouble, they would have come. It took me 15 years of therapy and agonizing self-reflection to realize that you can never be good enough for people who are fundamentally determined to see you as a burden. I slid the first photo to the back of the stack and stared at the second one. It was a Polaroid picture of me and my grandpa Samuel. He was my father's dad, but they couldn't have been more different. Samuel was a tough, gritty, blue-collar mechanic who built his entire life with his own two calloused hands. In the picture, we were sitting on his wooden back porch, drinking lemonade. My small, pale hand was completely lost inside his big, grease-stained one. Grandpa Samuel was the only person in that entire bloodline who ever looked at me and actually saw a human being. He saw right through my father's tailored Armani suits and my mother's fake, rehearsed country club smile. He knew the massive suburban house I was living in wasn't a home. It was a pressure cooker of emotional abuse and neglect. He died of lung cancer when I was 19. I still vividly remember the smell of the damp earth and the rain at his funeral. My parents barely shed a single tear. They stood by the casket, shaking hands, handing out business cards, treating his funeral like a corporate networking event. Christopher spent the entire service texting a girl he was trying to sleep with. But a week before he passed, Grandpa Samuel called me alone into his sterile, beeping hospital room. His breathing was terribly shallow, his skin pale and thin like paper, but his eyes were sharp and entirely focused. "Joshua," he told me, gripping my wrist with a surprising amount of strength for a dying man. He pulled me close so I could hear his raspy voice. "Do not beg for love from empty people. Do you hear me? Your father is a hollow suit. Your mother is a ghost wearing jewelry. They will bleed you dry to feed that brother of yours. You are stronger than all of them combined. Don't let them break your spine." He didn't just leave me with words. He knew exactly what my parents were capable of. Without telling my father, my mother, or his own lawyer, he left a small, secret bank account strictly in my name, set up through a friend of his at a local credit union. It wasn't a massive fortune, but it was exactly enough to get me out of that toxic house, rent a terrible studio apartment, and put me through community college to learn software engineering. If my father had known about that money, he would have dragged me to court, fought for custody of the funds, and found a legal loophole to steal every single cent to buy Christopher a new car. Grandpa Samuel saved my life from the grave. Looking at his weathered face in the photo, I touched the glossy paper and whispered a quiet thank you into the empty car. The third and final photo was of my Aunt Mary, my mother's younger sister. For years, I honestly thought she was my only ally left on this earth. When my mother would scream at me for breathing too loudly, Mary would slip me $20 bills when no one was looking. She would send me late-night text messages saying, "Hold on, Joshua. You're doing great. I love you." Right on cue, as if the universe was playing a sick joke on me, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. The bright screen lit up the dark interior of the car. It was a text from Aunt Mary. "Joshua, sweetie, I am so sorry about what your father said tonight at the wedding. It was completely unacceptable. Are you okay? Where are you going? Please tell me where you are." I stared at the glowing screen, my blood running absolutely cold. A year ago, I would have desperately typed out a reply. I would have pulled over, called her, and poured my broken heart out to her, crying about how much it hurt. But I knew the actual truth now. 10 months ago, I was fixing my mother's MacBook. She had complained it was running slow and demanded I fix it for free. She had left her iMessage app open on the desktop. I wasn't trying to snoop, but my name caught my eye. I scrolled up. I saw an entire years-long thread between her and Aunt Mary. Every single time I confided in Mary, every time I told her my struggles, my depression, my plans to move, or how much money I was making at my new job, Mary screenshotted it and sent it straight to my mother. In exchange, I found bank transfer receipts. My mother was paying Mary a monthly salary, essentially a bribe, to keep her quiet about some shady family financial business, and Mary was throwing me under the bus to keep the cash flowing. Mary was literally trading my psychological pain to pay off her credit card bills. I didn't type a reply. I didn't curse her out. I didn't even read the rest of the message. I simply tapped her name, scrolled down, and hit block caller. I tossed the 3 photos back into the glove box and slammed it shut with a loud crack. I was entirely, completely alone. And for the first time in my life, sitting in that freezing car on the side of the highway, I realized that being alone wasn't a weakness. It was a massive tactical advantage. Nobody could betray me if I trusted absolutely no one. I put the car in drive, the tires crunching against the gravel, and headed home. I had a war to start. My apartment was dark, quiet, and peaceful when I walked in. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. I walked straight over to my desk, sat down in my office chair, and plugged the black USB drive into my laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating the dark room and casting sharp shadows against the wall. I clicked on a heavily encrypted folder labeled Taxes_2022. It was a decoy name. Inside were dozens of meticulously organized audio files, scanned bank statements, and intercepted emails. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, took a deep breath, and clicked the first audio file. The sound of clinking martini glasses and a smooth jazz band played in the background. An expensive steakhouse downtown. Then my father's voice cut through the noise. Low, smooth, and sickeningly intimate. "Eleanor only knows the man I pretend to be," my father said. "She's obsessed with the country club, the image. It's exhausting. But you're the real thing. I can't wait to finally leave her. Just give me a little more time to move the assets." He was talking to his mistress. I had planted a micro-recording device under the passenger seat of his Mercedes months ago, when he forced me to detail the interior for him because he didn't want to pay a professional. Listening to the man who constantly lectured me on morality, family values, and religious duty speak to another woman like a love-struck teenager made my stomach physically turn. I closed that file and opened another folder. This one contained the absolute, unvarnished truth about my mother. Eleanor played the role of a wealthy, graceful philanthropist. She organized charity galas and judged other women's outfits. The reality? She was drowning in illegal, suffocating debt. She had a severe gambling addiction that she masked to my father as high-yield angel investments. I had found the paper trail when she asked me to organize her home office for a tax audit. She had taken out massive, predatory loans from shadow lenders, dangerous people who don't care about your country club status. To secure the loans, she had forged my father's signature on dozens of documents. Then I played the most recent audio file. It was my father and my brother, Christopher, talking in my father's private study last Christmas. "Joshua is a literal tumor on this family," my father said, the sound of ice clinking in a Scotch glass following his words. "He's awkward, he's a software nerd, he has no ambition. We just have to tolerate him at the holidays until he finally gives up and moves across the country." Christopher laughed. A dry, cruel, elitist sound. "Don't worry, Dad. He's too pathetic to ever make a real move. He'll always be begging for scraps at the table. Just ignore him." I took the headphones off and laid them on the desk. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart wasn't racing. I felt entirely cold. Clinical. Precise. They had built their entire glittering lives on a crumbling foundation of lies, fraud, and cruelty. It was time to hand them the sledgehammer. There was a heavy, loaded pause on the line. I could hear the sound of his bedsheets rustling. Then, David sighed, the sleep instantly vanishing from his voice. "I'm making a pot of coffee. I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, David was sitting at my kitchen island, drinking terrible, bitter instant coffee out of a chipped mug. I turned the laptop toward him. For over an hour, he didn't speak a single word. He just clicked through the files, reading the forged bank statements, analyzing the loan agreements, and listening to the audio recordings with a hard frown on his face. He took off his glasses, pinched the bridge of his nose, and rubbed his eyes. "Joshua," he said slowly, looking at me like I was holding a live grenade. "This isn't just family drama anymore. This is felony financial fraud. This is extortion. This is a tactical nuke." "I know," I replied. "If you do this," David leaned forward, his ruthless lawyer instincts fully kicking in, "you have to do it clean. No screaming matches, no crying, no emotional outbursts. That's what they expect. You hit them where it actually hurts. Their pride. Their money. Their fake standing in the community. He pointed a finger at the glowing laptop screen. Your dad cares about his reputation and his ego. Your mom cares about the illusion of endless wealth. And Christopher cares about looking like a flawless god to his new wife and his hospital board. We strip it all away at exactly the same time. I nodded slowly. How do we do it? We put them in a room where they think they have the absolute upper hand. David smirked. Then we lock the door, throw away the key, and hand them the evidence. Before we finalized the logistics of the plan, I reached over and opened one last, hidden folder on the desktop. You need to see this, I said, my voice hardening. This is Christopher. I opened a series of forwarded emails. A few years ago, Christopher had lazily handed me his old laptop, demanding I transfer his files to his new MacBook because he was too busy saving lives to do it himself. He was so incredibly arrogant that he just assumed I was too stupid or too intimidated to look at his personal files. Christopher had known about our father's affair for 3 solid years. He even had private investigator photos of Matthew and his mistress walking into a hotel. But he didn't tell our mother. He didn't defend the sanctity of the family he preached so much about. Instead, he used the incredibly damaging information to systematically blackmail our father. I showed David the emails from Christopher's private, encrypted account sent directly to our father. Christopher subtly, but clearly, threatened to expose the affair to my mother and the country club board unless Matthew transferred a massive chunk of his commercial real estate holdings, millions of dollars worth of property, into Christopher's name as an early inheritance. David let out a low whistle under his breath, reading the text. Extortion. From the Golden Boy Doctor. He literally shook down his own father. He used Dad's cheating to get incredibly rich, I said, feeling a bitter, acidic taste in the back of my mouth. He let Mom live an absolute lie, looking like a fool, so he could buy his Porsche and fund his lavish lifestyle. That means Christopher's new wife, Sarah, has absolutely no idea she just married a clinical sociopath, David noted, leaning back in his chair. Exactly, I said, tapping the desk. Sarah comes from extremely old, very conservative money. Her family values reputation above breathing. She thinks she married a modern-day saint who cures cancer. We absolutely have to invite her. David smirked, a dangerous, predatory look in his eyes. We invite them all to dinner. The prodigal son seeking forgiveness. They won't be able to resist. The next morning, the sun was barely up, but I was wide awake. I drafted a group text message on my new burner phone. I kept my words carefully chosen, meticulously playing the role of the defeated, desperate, pathetic son they all believed me to be. Dad, Mom, Christopher. I know what happened at the wedding was ugly, and I caused a scene by leaving. I've had time to think. I don't want to lose my family completely. Please come to my apartment for dinner this Thursday. I want to formally apologize to all of you and make things right. Sarah, you are more than welcome to come too. It took exactly 3 agonizing hours for my father to reply. His text was short and sharp. We will be there at 7 p.m. sharp. Do not waste our time, Joshua. They were coming. They wanted to see me physically crawl. They wanted the deep, arrogant satisfaction of watching me beg for a microscopic scrap of their approval. Thursday arrived quickly. I took the day off work and spent the entire afternoon transforming my small, modest apartment. I cleaned everything until it shined. I set my cheap dining table with the nicest plates I owned. I ordered incredibly expensive takeout from a high-end Italian place downtown and plated it perfectly so it looked home-cooked. I placed a sleek, black Bluetooth speaker right in the dead center of the table, making it look like a modern, minimalist centerpiece. Under the table, heavily taped to the bottom of my own wooden chair, was a thick, bulging manila envelope. David arrived at 6 p.m. carrying a briefcase. He immediately went into my bedroom, setting up his laptop and connecting it to the Bluetooth speaker and a small, hidden security camera I had placed on the bookshelf in the living room. He would be my unseen witness, recording everything for legal protection. "You ready for this?" David asked, adjusting his tie and looking at me seriously. "I've been preparing for this for 28 years, I replied, rolling up my sleeves. "Let's burn it down." At exactly 7 p.m., a heavy, demanding knock echoed through my apartment. I took a deep breath, consciously dropped my shoulders, pasted on a nervous, highly submissive look, and opened the door. They stood there in the narrow hallway like royalty inspecting a dirty peasant's hut. My father wore a sharp, custom-tailored suit, his hair perfectly slicked back. My mother wore an excessive amount of pearls and clutched a designer leather bag like someone in the building might steal it. Christopher looked incredibly smug, wearing a cashmere sweater, holding Sarah's hand. Sarah, bless her heart, gave me a polite, slightly pitying smile. "Come in," I said quietly, stepping aside. My mother stepped inside, the overpowering scent of her perfume filling the room. Her nose immediately wrinkled as she looked at my modest couch and worn rug. "Well, it's quaint. Smells heavily of cheap garlic." "Hello, Joshua," Christopher said loudly, walking in and clapping me heavily and patronizingly on the shoulder. "Takes a big man to finally admit when he's hit rock bottom. We're here to listen." We moved to the small dining table. I poured the expensive red wine I had bought. We ate in an incredibly oppressive, suffocating silence for the first 20 minutes. Sarah nervously tried to make small talk about her upcoming honeymoon plans to Greece, but the sheer tension in the room was crushing. My father sat stiffly, his arms crossed, aggressively refusing to touch his food. Finally, he slammed his wine glass down on the table, the dark liquid splashing over the rim. "Enough," he barked, his voice booming in the small space. "We didn't drive across town to eat this garbage. You said you wanted to apologize. So do it. You have exactly 5 minutes to explain why we shouldn't forget you completely exist." I slowly put my silver fork down on my plate. I wiped my mouth deliberately with a cloth napkin. I looked directly at my father, then at my mother, then at my brother. The nervous, submissive, pathetic look on my face completely melted away. I sat back heavily in my chair, staring them down. "I'm not going to apologize, Dad." My father's face instantly turned a bright, alarming shade of purple. The vein on his forehead throbbed wildly. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his expensive dental veneers would crack. "Excuse me?" he snarled, leaning over the table. "You drag us to this pathetic dump to waste our time? I brought you here for the absolute truth," I said evenly, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I kept my hands folded on the table, tapping my phone with my thumb to send the prearranged signal to David in the bedroom. The black Bluetooth speaker sitting perfectly in the center of the table hissed to life with a crackle of static. Suddenly, my father's voice, loud and crystal clear, filled the entire apartment. "Eleanor only knows the man I pretend to be. She's obsessed with the country club, the image. It's exhausting, but you're the real thing. I can't wait to finally leave her. Just give me a little more time to move the assets." Then came the unmistakable sound of a younger woman giggling flirtatiously. A woman who was definitely 100% not my mother. The silence that followed the recording was heavy enough to crush a human skull. My mother's face went completely slack. All the arrogant, wealthy bravado vanished. The color violently drained from her cheeks until she looked like a wax figure. She stared blankly at the black speaker, her mouth opening and closing rapidly like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. Christopher violently leaped out of his chair, knocking it backward. "Turn that off!" he yelled, his voice cracking with sudden panic. My father lunged aggressively across the dining table. He grabbed his heavy crystal wine glass and hurled it directly at the speaker. The glass missed, shattering against the drywall, sending deep red wine splashing violently across the white paint like a crime scene. In his frantic lunge, a sharp, jagged piece of the broken crystal sliced deeply across his palm. Thick, Bright red blood immediately began dripping heavily from his hand, splattering loudly onto the pristine white tablecloth. "You vindictive little rat," my father hissed, gripping his bleeding hand to his chest, his eyes wild with rage. "You illegally recorded me? You think you can use some fake, edited audio to ruin my life?" "It's not fake, Matthew," I said, refusing to call him Dad. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. And trust me, that's not even the best part. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please help me like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. I reached under my chair, violently ripped the thick manila envelope free from the duct tape, and threw it hard onto the center of the table, right next to the pool of my father's blood. Glossy photos, heavily highlighted bank statements, and printed emails scattered everywhere across the wood. "Look at the photos, Mom," I commanded, my voice echoing off the walls. Eleanor, trembling so violently her pearl necklace rattled, reached out and picked up a glossy 8x10 photograph. It was my father, walking out of an upscale downtown hotel room, intimately holding hands with a tall, blonde woman. Sarah, Christopher's sweet, incredibly naive new wife, leaned over the table to look at the photo in my mother's shaking hands. She gasped incredibly loudly, her hand flying to cover her mouth in pure shock. "Oh my God," she whispered, her eyes wide with horror. That's Mrs. Henderson." I smiled. A cold, hard, absolutely ruthless smile. Bingo! Dad's mistress isn't just a random woman. It is the wife of the chief of medicine at Christopher's hospital, Mr. Henderson, the exact man who holds Christopher's career, his promotions, and his medical license in his hands. My father stumbled backward, knocking into the wall, his face twisting in genuine, unadulterated panic. "You wouldn't. I already sent the encrypted file to his private email an hour ago." I lied completely effortlessly, watching the life drain from my father's eyes. "No!" Christopher screamed, grabbing his hair, his polished, elite demeanor completely shattering into a million pieces. "My job, my reputation, you ruined me." "But wait, Christopher, there's more," I said, pointing aggressively to the stack of bank statements. "Mom, care to explain these documents to the family? The massive, illegal loans you took out from shadow lenders to pay off your crippling gambling debts? You forged Dad's signature on all of them to get the cash." My father violently whipped his head toward my mother, completely ignoring his bleeding hand. "What the hell is he talking about, Eleanor? It was just a mistake," she sobbed, black mascara running heavily down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "I was going to win it back at the tables. I swear." I looked directly at Christopher and Sarah. "Sarah, you know that beautiful, multimillion-dollar new mansion Christopher told you his parents bought you both for a wedding gift? Check the second page of that loan agreement." Sarah grabbed the heavy legal paper with shaking hands. Her eyes frantically scanned the dense legal jargon until she found the highlighted section. "It's listed as collateral," she said, her voice hollow and dead. "The house is leveraged against Eleanor's illegal loans. If she defaults, the bank takes the house. We own nothing." Christopher fell to his knees. He literally dropped to his knees on my cheap laminate floor. The golden child, the elite cancer doctor, the man who had everything, kneeling in front of the brother he called a worthless tumor just days prior. "Joshua, please," Christopher begged, real tears streaming down his face, his voice high and pathetic. "Please don't say anything else. We can fix this. I'll give you money, whatever you want. Just stop." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold disgust. "I don't want your dirty money, Christopher. You blackmailed Dad for his commercial real estate to keep his affair quiet. Did you tell your new wife about that?" That your massive inheritance is actually just extortion money. Sarah let out a horrific, guttural sob that tore through the room. She looked down at Christopher kneeling on the floor like he was a terrifying, unrecognizable monster. "You make me absolutely sick," Sarah whispered, physically backing away from Christopher until she hit the front door. "Sarah, baby, wait. I can explain," Christopher pleaded, reaching his hands out toward her from the floor. She violently slapped his hand away. With trembling fingers, she grabbed the massive diamond ring off her finger and threw it as hard as she could. It hit Christopher square in the chest and bounced onto the floor, rolling under the couch. "I'm calling my lawyer right now," she cried. "We are getting a divorce. Do not contact me." Sarah turned, ripped the door open, and ran out into the hallway, the heavy wood slamming shut behind her with a deafening bang. With Sarah gone, the entire illusion of the perfect family completely evaporated. My parents turned on each other like starving, rabid wolves trapped in a cage. "You stupid idiot!" my father screamed at my mother, holding his bloody hand, his face inches from hers. "You bankrupt us for blackjack? You forged my name? You're going to prison. You slept with Henderson's wife!" My mother shrieked back, grabbing a salad plate and throwing it directly at his head. It missed, shattering against the kitchen counter. "You ruined our status. You lost us everything. Get out," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream, but it was firm enough to cut right through their chaotic screaming match. They froze and looked at me, breathing heavily. David stepped out of the bedroom, holding his phone up, the red recording light blinking. "You heard him. Trespassing is a crime. And since I am his acting attorney, I highly advise you leave this premises immediately before I call the police for property damage and assault." My father glared at me. It was pure, unfiltered hatred in his eyes. But underneath that hatred, for the very first time in my entire life, I saw something else. I saw genuine, paralyzing fear. He turned around without a word and stormed out the door. My mother stumbled clumsily after him, crying hysterically, clutching her expensive purse like a shield. Christopher slowly got off his knees. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. He just walked out the door, looking completely dead inside. The apartment was an absolute disaster zone. There was broken glass everywhere, dark red wine spilled across the walls, and drops of my father's blood drying on the white tablecloth. But the silence that finally settled over the room was the single most beautiful, comforting sound I had ever heard in my entire life. David walked over to the kitchen, grabbed 2 cold beers from the fridge, popped the caps and handed me one. "Well," he said, clinking his brown bottle against mine. "That was downright biblical." I took a long, deep drink of the cold beer. Tasted like absolute victory. Right on cue, my new burner phone started buzzing aggressively on the counter. It was my father calling. Then, a text from Christopher. Then, a voicemail from Aunt Mary. I picked up the phone, calmly went into the settings menu, and deactivated the number entirely. I had bought a new phone and a brand new SIM card earlier that morning. They would never be able to reach me again. I walked over and opened the sliding glass door to my small balcony. The cool, crisp night air hit my face. I looked out over the railing at the glowing city lights stretching out into the distance. For 28 long years, I had carried a massive, suffocating boulder on my chest. I had let their cruel words define my existence. I had let their constant emotional abuse convince me that I was fundamentally worthless and unlovable. But standing there on that balcony, listening to the distant hum of traffic, I realized the boulder was completely gone. My lungs expanded fully for the first time I could ever remember. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad, or vengeful, or broken. I just felt clean. "You okay out there, man?" David called out from the kitchen, using a broom to sweep up the shattered wine glass. "Yeah," I said, leaning against the railing and smiling a real, genuine smile into the night sky. "I'm finally okay. For the first time, I am perfectly okay." The morning after that explosive dinner, The sun came up just like it always does, but the world had completely fundamentally shifted. I woke up in my quiet apartment, made a pot of coffee, and sat on my couch. I didn't feel the urge to check my phone. I didn't feel the gnawing anxiety in my stomach that usually accompanied thoughts of my family. I just felt a profound, incredible stillness. But while my world was finally peaceful, Christopher's world was actively burning to the ground. You see, Sarah didn't just leave my apartment and go cry in a hotel room. Sarah came from old money, and people with old money do not mess around when they feel they have been made a fool of. She drove straight to her parents' massive estate, woke her father up at 2 in the morning, and told him everything. By 8 a.m. the next day, her father had hired the most ruthless, expensive divorce lawyer in the state. Christopher actually went to work that morning at the hospital, completely delusional, thinking he could somehow charm his way out of the disaster. He thought his status as an elite cancer doctor would protect him. He thought he was untouchable. David, my lawyer and best friend, had a buddy who worked in the hospital's legal department. He gave us the play-by-play of exactly how Christopher's golden tower collapsed. Christopher walked into the oncology wing expecting his usual VIP treatment. But the nurses wouldn't look him in the eye. The other doctors turned their backs when he walked past the break room. The whispers were already spreading like wildfire. By 9:30 a.m., Christopher was paged to the chief of medicine's office, Mr. Henderson. When Christopher walked in, he wasn't alone. The hospital's head of human resources was there, along with 2 security guards. But the real shock was sitting in the corner chair. It was Sarah's lawyer. Sarah hadn't just filed for divorce. She had completely scorched the earth. She had taken the copies of the blackmail emails I gave her, the ones proving Christopher had extorted our father's commercial real estate to keep the affair quiet, and handed them directly to the hospital board to prove his lack of moral character during the divorce proceedings. But it gets worse for him. You remember the bluff I made at the dinner table? When I told my father I had already sent the evidence of his affair to Mr. Henderson. I didn't actually send it. I didn't have to, because when Sarah's lawyer contacted Mr. Henderson that morning to subpoena financial records regarding Christopher's assets, the lawyer casually dropped the bomb about why the family was imploding. The lawyer told Henderson exactly who my father was sleeping with. Henderson looked at Christopher from across his massive mahogany desk. Christopher was sweating through his expensive tailored scrubs. "Dr. Evans," Henderson said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "We have built this hospital on a foundation of absolute trust and ethical integrity. I have just been informed that you have been actively blackmailing your own father for a multi-million-dollar inheritance, using his affair with my wife as leverage." Christopher tried to deny it. He stuttered, he panicked. He threw his hands up and blamed me. He told them his brother was a mentally unstable liar who doctored the emails. But Sarah's lawyer calmly slid a thick folder across the desk. It contained the verified digital footprint of the emails. It was undeniable proof. "Your upcoming promotion to head of oncology is permanently revoked," Henderson told him coldly. "Furthermore, your medical license is being flagged for an immediate ethical review by the state medical board pending a full investigation into your financial extortion. Clean out your locker. Security will escort you off the premises." Just like that, the golden child was thrown out into the street. He was escorted through the main lobby, carrying a cardboard box of his belongings, while dozens of his former colleagues and staff members watched in absolute silence. He lost his 6-figure salary, he lost his prestigious reputation, and he lost the one thing he valued more than oxygen: the unearned admiration of everyone around him. While Christopher was being stripped of his medical royalty status, my parents were facing a completely different kind of apocalypse. My mother, Eleanor, had always been a woman who cared exclusively about survival and status. For 28 years, I thought she was deeply devoted to my father, blindly following his lead just to maintain the illusion of a perfect traditional marriage. I was wrong. She wasn't devoted. She was just incredibly calculating. The moment she realized my father's affair with Mrs. Henderson was going to become public knowledge and completely destroy their social standing at the country club, she flipped a switch. The very next morning, Before my father even had time to hire a crisis management team, my mother filed for divorce. This was the ultimate betrayal in my father's eyes. He had assumed she would stand quietly by his side, play the role of the loyal, forgiving wife, and help him weather the storm. Instead, she threw him directly under the bus to save herself. She hired an aggressive attorney and aggressively leaked the details of my father's infidelity to the wives of the country club board members. She played the ultimate victim card. She told everyone that she was a deeply abused, neglected wife who had been completely blindsided by her husband's monstrous behavior. She completely conveniently forgot to mention her own massive illegal gambling debts and the forged loan documents. But her brilliant plan to escape with half of my father's assets completely backfired. During the aggressive discovery phase of the divorce, the court ordered a full forensic audit of their finances. The shadow lenders, the dangerous people my mother had borrowed heavily from, didn't care about family drama or country club gossip. They wanted their money. When my mother stopped making the massive monthly interest payments because her accounts were frozen by the court, the lenders executed the collateral clause on the forged documents. They foreclosed on the multi-million-dollar mansion. I actually drove past the neighborhood a few weeks later. I parked down the street and watched. There were two massive moving trucks parked in their perfectly manicured driveway. The bank had seized the property. I watched my father, wearing a wrinkled, cheap suit, carrying boxes out to a rented sedan. He looked 10 years older. His hair was completely graying. His shoulders were slumped, and his face was drawn and hollow. He had lost his job at the investment firm after the extortion and affair rumors severely damaged his professional credibility. My mother was standing on the pristine front lawn, screaming at the movers, clutching her designer handbag like it was a life raft. She had to move into a tiny, run-down apartment complex on the bad side of town because her credit was completely destroyed. The women at the country club who she used to host lavish brunches for completely ostracized her. When she walked into the local grocery store, people turned their shopping carts down different aisles to avoid her. They had spent decades treating me like dirt to build their sparkling, flawless empire. And it took less than 30 days for that entire empire to crumble into absolute dust. As for me, the months following the dinner were a completely surreal experience. I had spent my entire life bracing for impact, constantly waiting for the next insult, the next screaming match, the next brutal reminder that I was unwanted. When that threat was finally removed, I had to completely relearn how to breathe. I took the small amount of money left from Grandpa Samuel's secret college fund, combined it with my saved salary from my software engineering job, and took a massive leap of faith. I quit my corporate job and started my own independent software consulting firm. Without the massive, suffocating weight of my family's constant emotional abuse dragging me down, my mind was finally clear. I poured all my energy, all my focus, and all my newfound freedom into my work. I started pitching contracts to medium-sized tech companies, offering specialized cybersecurity solutions. Because I wasn't constantly exhausted from navigating my parents' toxic minefield, I was sharp. I was hungry. I was effective. Within 6 months, I landed my first massive corporate contract. Within a year, I had to rent a commercial office space downtown and hire 3 junior developers just to keep up with the workload. I was making more money in a single month than I used to make in an entire year. But the money wasn't the best part. The best part was the absolute, undeniable peace. I bought a beautiful, modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet, heavily wooded neighborhood just outside the city. It didn't have crystal chandeliers or a massive gated driveway like my parents' foreclosed mansion. It had a wraparound wooden porch, a big backyard, and a lot of natural sunlight. I adopted a golden retriever mix from the local shelter and named him Sam, after my grandfather. I finally understood what it meant to actually build a real family. Family isn't determined by blood or a shared last name. Blood just means you are biologically related. True family is defined by loyalty, mutual respect, and unconditional support. David became more than just my lawyer. He became my absolute brother. We spent our weekends grilling steaks in my backyard, drinking good beer, and watching football. I started dating a wonderful, intelligent woman named Clara who worked as a high school science teacher. When I told her the entire truth about my past, she didn't look at me with pity or judge me as broken. She just held my hand, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "They didn't deserve a single second of your time." I didn't think about Matthew, Eleanor, or Christopher very often. I didn't actively stalk their social media or ask around town about their misery. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I had completely released them. I had evicted them from my mind. I was truly, completely free. Until one rainy Tuesday night in November, exactly 14 months after the wedding. It was a cold, miserable night. A heavy thunderstorm was rolling through the city, shaking the windows of my house. I was sitting in my warm living room, a fire crackling in the fireplace, with Clara reading a book on the couch and Sam sleeping heavily at my feet. Suddenly, the heavy brass knocker on my front door banged loudly, echoing through the quiet house. Sam immediately woke up and barked deeply. I frowned, setting my laptop on the coffee table. I wasn't expecting any packages, and David always texted before he came over. I walked to the front door, flipped on the porch light, and looked through the small glass peephole. My blood ran completely cold for a fraction of a second. But then, a strange wave of profound calm washed over me. I unlocked the deadbolt and slowly pulled the heavy wooden door open. Standing on my porch, getting absolutely soaked by the blowing rain, were Matthew, Eleanor, and Christopher. The visual transformation was genuinely shocking. They looked like hollow, defeated ghosts of the arrogant people they used to be. My father was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting raincoat, his face deeply lined with stress and exhaustion. My mother's hair was flat and wet, her face devoid of expensive makeup, holding a cheap plastic umbrella that was bending in the wind. And Christopher, the golden child. He looked terrible. He was dangerously thin, with dark, heavy bags under his eyes. His posture was completely slumped. After losing his medical license and going through a brutal, highly publicized divorce where Sarah completely cleaned him out, he had been forced to take a minimum wage data entry job just to pay his rent. They stood there shivering, staring at me. I stood in the warm doorway, wearing comfortable sweatpants and a premium cotton t-shirt, looking completely healthy, successful, and at peace. "Joshua," my father said, his voice cracking violently over the sound of the pouring rain. He didn't sound demanding or arrogant anymore. He sounded desperate. "Please, can we come inside? Just for a few minutes." I didn't move an inch. I kept my hand firmly on the doorframe, physically blocking the entrance. "No," I said, my voice completely flat and calm. "You cannot." My mother pushed past my father, her eyes wide and pleading. "Joshua, please, we have absolutely nothing left. The lawyers took everything. Your father is working retail. Christopher is drowning in legal debt from the custody battle over his assets. We are being evicted from our apartment next week. We know you own a successful company now. We know you have money. You have to help us. We are your family." I stared at her. I looked at the woman who had publicly laughed into a microphone at a wedding and told 500 people she wished she had given me away. "You aren't my family," I said quietly. "You are just people I used to know." Christopher stepped forward. He actually looked like he was about to drop to his knees again right there on the wet wooden porch. "Josh, please," he begged, his voice trembling pitifully. "I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for everything I said, for everything I did. Just give us a loan. We'll pay you back. I swear to God." I looked at my brother. I looked at the man who had gleefully watched our parents emotionally torture me for nearly 3 decades just so he could maintain his superiority. "You aren't here because you are finally sorry for my pain, Christopher," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the thunderstorm like a razor blade. "You are here because losing me never actually hurt you. Losing yourselves did. You only care now because you hit rock bottom and you see me standing at the top." My father reached a shaking hand out toward the door. "Joshua, you are my son. You can't just turn your back on us. It's cruel." I let out a short, completely humorless laugh. I looked at all three of them, standing in the cold rain, completely broken by their own horrific choices. Cruel, I asked softly. You called me a mistake in front of 500 people. You treated my entire existence like a burden you were forced to carry. I am not turning my back on you, Matthew. I am simply giving you exactly what you asked for. I am removing the mistake from your lives. None of them could answer. They just stood there, their mouths slightly open, shivering in the cold. I was never the mistake, I said, looking them dead in the eyes one last time. I was the consequence. I stepped back, grabbed the heavy brass handle, and slammed the door completely shut. I turned the deadbolt until it clicked loudly. I didn't look back through the peephole. I didn't stand by the door listening to them cry. I simply walked back into my warm living room, sat down next to Clara, pet my dog, and opened my laptop to get back to work. I never saw or spoke to any of them ever again. That was 3 years ago. Today, my company is thriving, Clara and I are engaged to be married, and my life is filled with a kind of joy I never thought was scientifically possible when I was crying on that bathroom floor at 13 years old. If there is one massive, undeniable truth I want you to take away from my story, it is this. You do not owe your life, your sanity, or your success to toxic people just because you happen to share the same bloodline. For years, I allowed society's ridiculous expectation of family loyalty to keep me chained to people who were actively destroying my mental health. I thought that if I just tried harder, if I was just a little more successful, a little more agreeable, they would magically wake up one day and love me. But abusers do not change just because you love them harder. They only stop when the cost of their cruelty becomes entirely unbearable to them. The greatest revenge you can ever achieve isn't destroying your enemies. It's healing so completely that their toxic behavior no longer has any power over your emotions. It's building a life so incredibly beautiful, successful, and peaceful that their darkness cannot survive in your sunlight. You have the absolute right to set unbreakable boundaries. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to choose your own family. Your value is not determined by the broken people who failed to appreciate you. You are not a mistake. You are the architect of your own incredible future. Thank you so much for listening to my story and walking through this journey with me. Before you go, I want to hear from you. What was your favorite lesson from this story? Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to protect your own peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below, or simply drop the word good, so I know you made it to the very end and that this story resonated with you. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about taking back control of your life. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next one.